Week 10 of the 2022 college football season is wrapped up, and today, as we begin to look forward to Week 11, I'll be giving you guys my updated college football rankings for this 2022 season. Week 10 turned out to be an insane week of action. We saw multiple top 10 matchups, multiple big-name teams get eliminated from the college football playoff. In the night games of Week 10 alone, we saw both Alabama and Clemson get eliminated from college football playoff contention. So definitely an insane week of action. And things are starting to heat up as we head into Week 11. I'll be giving you guys my updated rankings here today. Let's get started with 1 through 7. And we got a new number 1 team this week. No surprise, it's going to be Georgia. This team dominated Tennessee 27-13. It was only a 2-touchdown win, but Georgia led that game the entire time for the most part, except for the very beginning when Tennessee was up by a field goal. But for the most part, Georgia got a decent lead in the first quarter and didn't look back, and they got the win there 27-13. They're undefeated at 9-0, and obviously that is just a massive win for Georgia. More than likely, they have now won the SEC East, and they're in a very good position right now to make it to the college football playoff once again. Number 2 is Ohio State. They beat Northwestern 21-7, kind of a surprising score there. You would think Ohio State would have just dominated the team that is the worst team in the Big Ten, but in the end, Ohio State only won it by a couple of touchdowns, and the weather did make an impact. It was a very windy game with some rain as well. So, I mean, it was expected to be more lower scoring, but, I mean, Northwestern was up for a long time in that game when they were up by a touchdown. But Ohio State got the win in the end. That's what really matters. They are 9-0 and still undefeated. Michigan jumps up to number 3 this week after their win over Rutgers. They've also, I mean, they kind of had a similar game that Ohio State did in that matter. They were playing a poor opponent, one of the worst teams in the Big Ten, and they were losing for a long time. Michigan was actually down to Rutgers at halftime. So that was a close game for a long time. But Michigan, I mean, they shut out Rutgers in the second half, and they managed to win that one 52-17. So they blew out the Scarlet Knights in the end, and Michigan 9-0 on the season. We got 2 teams from the Big Ten in the top 3 heading into Week 11. And obviously, if you look down the road a little bit, we see Ohio State face off against Michigan in just a few weeks. That game is in Columbus this season, and that is more than likely going to be your Big Ten East championship, and honestly, almost your Big Ten championship, because the winner of that game is more than likely going to win the Big Ten championship over the Big Ten West champion. I mean, the Big Ten West is just a scrambled mess. I mean, you got Illinois at the top right now, but they just lost to 3-5 Michigan State yesterday. So, I mean, the Big Ten West is an absolute joke in comparison to the Big Ten East. So, more than likely, it's going to be Ohio State or Michigan in the college football playoff this season. And the winner of that game in a few weeks will likely be the representative of the Big Ten. And, yeah, then you got Tennessee at number 4. They lost to Georgia 13-27. A disappointing loss for Tennessee. Obviously, they've had such a great season to this point. But, I mean, going up against Georgia, that defense just shut down the Tennessee offense. Tennessee's offense is a big reason why I had the Vols at number 1 for the past 3 weeks. I did put Tennessee at number 1 after their win over Alabama, and I kept them there, obviously, until this game when they just lost to Georgia. But I'm going to still keep them in the top 4. I think Tennessee's worthy of still being in the top 4 at this current point. I mean, at 8-1, this team is I mean, their only loss being to Georgia. They are still very much in contention for the college football playoff, especially with Alabama pretty much now being eliminated. But there's another team now that we got to start to worry about out of the SEC, and that is LSU. LSU is playing outstanding football right now. Ever since LSU lost to Tennessee, they were dominated by the Vols just a few weeks ago, by the way. I mean, LSU has been just outstanding. They just beat Alabama 32-31. They beat Ole Miss right before that. I mean, LSU is playing as good as anybody in the country right now, if you ask me. And I know they're a 2-loss team, but this is a really good 2-loss team, and this is a team that's improved drastically over the course of the season significantly. I mean, their other loss, they lost to Tennessee 40-13, and they lost to Florida State back in week 1 by 1. And, I mean, this team has come a long ways since then, and Florida State isn't even that, I mean, they're not good, but, I mean, that's still way back in week 1. That's a long time ago at this current point. So, I mean, LSU coming off of a huge win over Florida and then 2 straight wins over top 7 opponents. LSU is worthy of being in the top 5 now as a 2-loss team ahead of Oregon and even undefeated TCU. LSU really like this team right now. I mean, the way they played last night just was very impressive. So I got LSU jumping up 8 positions into the top 5. Oregon's number 6. They beat Colorado 49-10. Their one loss is to guess who? Georgia. And now it's like Georgia 9-0. This is undisputably the best team in the nation now. I mean, Georgia, they beat Oregon, who has been nothing short of outstanding after their loss to Georgia back in week 1. They beat Tennessee, who obviously beat Alabama prior to that. I mean, Georgia's, they're far and away now, you could say, the best team in the nation. And Oregon, at this current point, I think the Ducks are still a college football playoff contender, and it really helps Oregon that Clemson lost last night and that Alabama lost as well. So I think Oregon, they got a chance. If they can win the Pac-12 over a USC team, which it looks like it's going to be Oregon-USC right now, that could change. Probably competing for the Pac-12 title. I mean, you got an argument to put Oregon as a one-loss team in the playoff if that is the case, especially if, it's more than likely we're not going to see 2 Big Ten teams in the college football playoff. Either Ohio State or Michigan are going to be eliminated. So if Oregon wins out, you got a strong argument to put them in the college football playoff. TCU's number 7. They beat Texas Tech 34-24. I'm just not for sure on TCU right now. They're 9-0, and you guys are going to say, how are you not sure of TCU? This team is undefeated. They're 9-0 on the season. It's just TCU. They have caught multiple breaks this season, and I haven't really been terribly impressed by TCU despite them being still undefeated. And I feel like at some point they're going to slip up, and I think that is coming in Week 11 when they take on Texas on the road. That is a game that TCU should be worried about. If they can beat Texas, I'm convinced that the Horned Frogs are a real team. Especially going on the road in a night environment. I'll be convinced then. But, just the way they've been playing, they had a close game to West Virginia just a week before Texas Tech. Texas Tech dealt with a couple of injuries. And then you got Kansas State, of course, that I feel like Kansas State could have beaten TCU a couple of weeks before that. But, of course, they had a terrible quarterback situation because of injuries. So, TCU's caught a few breaks. I think this is a really good team, but I'm not convinced of them quite yet, so I'm going to keep them at number 7 for now. And if they beat Texas, I'll probably jump them up into the top 6, top 5, more than likely as a 10-0 team. But moving on to 8 through 14, we got Utah number 8. This team beat Arizona 45-20. Solid win for Utah there. And this team all season, despite being a 2-loss team at this current point, I've been optimistic about Utah. And they've had a couple of disappointing losses. Lost to Florida way back in week 1, which was just a terrible trap game from the start for week 1. And then, of course, that disappointing loss to UCLA. But otherwise, Utah's been a good team this season. I see tremendous potential in this team. So despite being a 2-loss team, I've got Utah in the top 10 just because, I really like this team still. And I feel like at the end of the day, once we get to bowl season and Utah gets to play opponent somewhere around their level, I think Utah is a team that really can shine there. And then you got USC at number 9. They beat Cal 41-35. That game was way closer than it should have been. In the first quarter it was pretty close, but then USC, they pulled away, and at one point in the second half it was looking like USC was just going to blow out Cal. And then the Golden Bears score 21 points in the fourth quarter. They get right back into that game, and they make it competitive in the end. They stormed back in the fourth quarter, and it looked like, once again, USC, they had a huge lead over them. So, to let them back in is not something that you want to do. And they also allowed 406 passing yards out of Jack Plummer, the Cal quarterback. So, not a very impressive performance out of USC, especially defensively. Defensively, USC's got to be better if they want any chance of being a dark horse contender at the end of the day. Quite honestly, Utah and USC, their chances, even UCLA, their chances of being in the playoff are pretty much over. I think Oregon's the one team that can still make it in just because their one loss was to Georgia way back in week 1. But I still feel like Utah, USC, they've got something to compete for. They still can compete for a New Year's Six bowl game, that's for sure. Ole Miss is number 10. They had a bye week last week, but they're still 8-1, and I've got them jumping back up into the top 10 for week 11. Alabama lost to LSU 31-32 in what was an outstanding football game. Alabama's played some insane games this season. That Tennessee-Alabama game is one of the best college football games I can remember in recent history. And they play LSU on the road in another classic rivalry matchup, and LSU got the win 32-31. So obviously a brutal loss for Alabama that pretty much ruins their chances of winning a national title this season, which is a huge twist to see that in early November, just because All offseason, Alabama was widely considered the favorite to win a national title this season, and for a reason. I mean, Bryce Young coming back, this team with all the talent returning. I mean, 2021 was more or less a rebuild season for Alabama, and suddenly you're looking in early November of 2022, and the Crimson Tide are already eliminated at 7-2. It's very surprising to see this. That's for sure, as Alabama was once again considered a big national contender all offseason, but here we are in the Crimson Tide. They still can compete for a New Year's Six bowl game, but that is obviously a very detrimental loss to their chances of being a national contender this season. UCLA is number 12. They beat Arizona State 50-36. Also kind of a weird game last night in the Pac-12. They beat them by a couple of touchdowns, but they allowed 36 points to Arizona State, which is not something that you want to do, especially if you want any chance of still potentially being a dark horse contender. So that's obviously it's a win, but it certainly was not a very clean win. But UCLA is still 8-1, and they are a contender in the Pac-12. Penn State's number 13. They beat Indiana 45-14. A solid win for the Nittany Lions, moving up 4 positions after that win, and they are 7-2. North Carolina's number 14, and this team is quietly potentially the best team in the ACC right now. They beat Virginia 31-28. They are 8-1 on the season, and this is the North Carolina that we expected to see last season, them being a contender, and they've kind of snuck into the picture this season. They're in the top 15 now, and North Carolina is a team that very well could just go on to win the ACC this season. That's very much a possibility right now, as they're an 8-1 team, and obviously Clemson taking their first loss. I mean, I think we're bound for Clemson North Carolina ACC championship unless something shocking happens down the stretch. But moving on to 15 through 21, we got Clemson at number 15. This is where they fall. They fall just behind North Carolina, and they had a very disappointing loss at Notre Dame, 14-35. They were on the road in South Bend taking on a Notre Dame team that we knew they were playing their best football this season to this point, and Notre Dame really showed that. They have come a long ways since September. And Notre Dame, they beat them. They dominated them from the start. They were up 20-0. And Clemson was able to score a couple of touchdowns, but Notre Dame got the win comfortably there, 35-14. Clemson moving down 9 positions, and they are 8-1 on the season. First loss. That pretty much ends Clemson's chances of being in the college football playoff, and it pretty much ends the ACC's chances for that matter. The ACC conference is pretty much eliminated. You still got, I think, all the other conferences still have a chance. I mean, the Pac-12's chance is Oregon at this point. The Big 12, it's TCU. The Big 10, you got Michigan or Ohio State, and the SEC's obviously got a couple. In particular, I'd say Georgia and Tennessee. The pool for the college football playoff contenders is definitely shrinking by the week. Tulane's number 16. They beat Tulsa 27-13, moving up 3 positions after that win. And Tulane at 8-1 is quickly emerging as potentially the best Group of 5 team this season. Who would have thought after their terrible season in 2021? Texas is number 17. They beat Kansas State 34-27. And I was saying this last week. I thought Texas was and is the best 3-loss team in the country, just based on their close losses. And also, I like Quinn Ewers. I like the potential in this team. Their 3 losses were once again close against decent teams. So for Texas to beat Kansas State, they're a team that was coming off of an absolute annihilation of Oklahoma State. Was a solid win going on the road and doing that. I've got them moving up to 17. Illinois, number 18. This team is arguably the best team in the Big Ten West, but the Big Ten West in general is just a mess. I mean, it's a terrible division, and Illinois taking the loss to Michigan State here just reassures that. Illinois is now 7-2. I still have them in the top 18, the top 20, but at this point for Illinois, I mean, their chances of making the playoff, and there were some talks. What if Illinois wins out and wins the Big Ten championship somehow? They could get into the college football playoff, and that was a very reasonable argument. But at this point now, with them taking this loss, their chances are over as well. So we eliminated a lot of teams from college football playoff contention this past weekend. And Illinois, number 18, probably still my favorite to win the Big Ten West, even though you got 4 teams: Wisconsin, Iowa, Purdue, Minnesota, not far behind. Washington is number 19. They're entering the rankings this week after their win over Oregon State on Friday night, 24-21, and they have emerged back into the picture. Michael Penix is an outstanding quarterback. He's come a long ways since his last couple of disappointing seasons at Indiana. Notre Dame's number 20. They beat Clemson 35-14. They're also one of the best 3-loss teams in the country. This team, once again, if you look at the way they've been playing right now, Notre Dame was off to a rough start this season at 0-2, but the way that they've been playing the past few weeks, they just beat Clemson 35-14. The week before that, they went on the road, beat Syracuse 41-24. Notre Dame, if you're looking at them right now and not looking at the record, they could be one of the best teams in the nation right now just based on how they're playing. So I got Notre Dame in the top 20, but obviously they still have a lot of work to do if they want to get to a New Year's Six bowl game, which is, it could go in as an at-large. That is still a possibility, but they do need some chaos to occur. Kansas State's number 21. They lost to Texas 27-34, moving down 6 positions after that. Disappointing loss. They're 6-3 in that game. I think K-State is lucky that it was close in the end with the score. They were down. They had an uphill battle going into the second half. I think they were down like 31-10 at halftime. So they snuck back in. They had a chance in the end, but K-State did take the loss, and now is a 6-3 team. That's disappointing for them, and that hurts their chances of being a Big 12 champion, but it is still a possibility for the Wildcats. Moving on to 22 through 25, we got Kentucky 22. They beat Missouri 21-17, 6-3 on the season. A good win for Kentucky. NC State's number 23. They beat Wake Forest 30-21, and the Wolfpack are a team that, the past few weeks, they have just looked terrible. They haven't been good at all, and so that's a really good win there for NC State, beating Wake Forest, who is one of the top teams in the ACC, and Wake Forest has fallen certainly very quickly, and NC State is back in the rankings this week at 23. Liberty's 24. I've finally put Liberty in the rankings. They beat Arkansas this past weekend on the road 21-19. I know Arkansas has been disappointed this season, but going on the road, facing an SEC opponent, that's a good win for Liberty, and the Flames are a good team this season, 8-1, only a 1-loss team heading into week 11. And then you got Baylor to wrap things up at 25. They beat Oklahoma on the road 38-35, and Baylor has been playing pretty well down the stretch as well. They're 6-3. They've taken 3 losses, but I think Baylor, after a disappointing start to the season, they're looking pretty good right now as we head into the second week of November. First 5 out, Louisville's 26, Kansas is 27. The Jayhawks are back in the picture, but not ranked quite yet. UCF is 28, Wake Forest is 29, and Oklahoma State, I don't know what is happening with Oklahoma State right now, but that team is, they've been just terrible the past few weeks. And, Oklahoma State just a few weeks ago was looking like a potential national contender and likely the Big 12 favorite. And suddenly they're completely out of the top 25, and their chances of winning the Big 12 are distant. So it's been a rough past few weeks for Oklahoma State. And dropped out this past weekend. Oklahoma State was 18. They dropped out. Wake Forest was 20. Oregon State was 23. Maryland was 24. And Syracuse was 25. So that's it. That's going to wrap it up for today. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below on these rankings. And I appreciate you guys watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.